continue to file in, we'll just give it another minute to make sure we all get in and start the show on time. Okay, so I see that it's 6:30 by my time. I'd just like to welcome everyone to another one of our HPAI updates for the small flock holders in Ontario. I'm Ashley Honsberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council, and I'm pleased to be supporting both OMAFRA and CFIA, as well as other folks, in providing this ongoing information sessions for everyone here. I do understand that we do have some folks dialing in via phone, and so I will just let you know we're going to sort out if you have questions or if you'd like to see the visuals in a little bit. So for now, unfortunately, I do have a couple of slides I was just going to run through to kick us off. So as I mentioned, the webinar series is supported through OMAFRA through the CAP funding, and we're pleased to be providing that service. And just a little bit about PIC, for those of you who aren't familiar, Poultry Industry Council, we're a charity that we're funded through the commercial sector of poultry in Ontario. We do all sorts of in-person training. We've been doing a lot of virtual training. We host Backyard Basics. Typically every year we host the big poultry trade show as well in London, Ontario. But generally think of us as education, extension, research impact sharing, as well as events. Our website has a ton of resources as well, and through the grant that we received from OMAFRA, we're looking to build those resources up. So I just wanted to draw your attention. This is our website. The biosecurity and disease tab is going to have more and more stuff available, particularly related to the avian influenza that's going on right now. We're hoping to do a Q&A, so the commonly asked questions that we hear, we're going to have questions and answers posted pretty soon. So if you're interested, you can find our resources, and we're trying to be a hub for others as well. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to, we're going to be talking a lot about biosecurity tonight, as well as in the coming days. And the industry's actually come up with some really good information on primers on different aspects of biosecurity for your farm. So here's just a little sample, something around cleaning and disinfecting for your barns and for your farms, as well as heightened biosecurity protocols. What does that mean and how do I do it? There's just different cards all through the different topics of interest for biosecurity. So those are free resources that are available. I highly, highly recommend anybody with poultry on the property to check these out. The next one, of course, which is Al Dam's section, is he's going to go in a little bit deeper, but all of the updates are being put onto the OMAFRA website available for you. The Featherboard Command Center sends out disease alerts, as well as shares information around the biosecurity zones as they emerge. So sign up for alerts through there. And the last one I'll draw attention to, and of course we are joined through CFIA tonight, is just the Canadian Food Inspection Agency website. It's going to be hosting a ton of information already, but the maps as well, which is going to be live and ongoing information that gets updated. So 4 really great places that will keep you up to date on the situation in between webinar sessions. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a little bit of an agenda tonight. So we have 3 speakers going through some new information. We've got Jennifer Martin joining us from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Dr. Luci Rosca, who is our poultry veterinarian for OMAFRA, and then we'll hear from Al Dam, our poultry specialist. Feel free to put your questions into the bottom, into the Q&A, and we're going to get to the questions at the end of the session. And for those of you who have to hop off early or anything like that, the recording will be available hopefully tomorrow, but if not, the next day. So Jennifer, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate that. So just wanted to say thank you for hosting me here again this week. For some of you who participated in the webinar pre-AI outbreak in early March, I was on there as well, and my colleague Greg has taken the last couple of webinars. So I'm going to fill in where Greg left off at your last meeting on March 30th. So my name is Jennifer Martin. I'm currently the incident commander for the AI situation in Ontario, and I work for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency out of Guelph. So since Greg spoke with you on March 30th, we have confirmed an additional 3 infected premises with AI in Ontario. So what we'll call IP4 is was confirmed on March 31st, 2022, and that's in the township of Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nations. And then we had IP5 confirmed on April 2nd in the township of Selwyn, and then IP6 in the township of Centre Wellington on April 4th. So as you can see, if you know your Ontario geography, we are moving around the province a little bit. The other thing I'm going to mention here is that CFIA is continuing to respond to quite a number of what we're calling sick bird calls across the province. So whether they be commercial operators or backyard flock owners, people are appropriately reporting to their veterinarians and to us when they have high mortality events, and we are following up accordingly. So I would fully expect that the 6 current infected premises that we have, that list will grow. They are posted publicly as soon as they are confirmed on our website, which Ashley had on the screen a little bit ago, and I can put in the chat as well. So for each of these infected premises, response efforts continue to be underway. The first phase is destruction for any birds remaining, then disposal of any affected material, some surveillance around the areas, and then hopefully the release of quarantine once they've met all the criteria. So that is underway at all 6 infected premises right now. The other thing that I know was a hot topic of conversation on your last call was the establishment of zones around each of these infected premises. So we do have that now up live on our website. The formal announcement of the primary control zones around our first 3 infected premises was sent out earlier today via a listserv, so some of you may have seen that. And our update on the website includes general information about how to move things and birds in and out of those primary control zones. So I am just going to show my screen for just a second so you can see what that looks like. First page here is the main avian influenza page for Ontario. As you can see, it is organized by tabs because there was avian influenza detected out in the Atlantic provinces earlier this year. So on the Ontario page, it does contain all of our 6 current confirmed infected premises. And then as you scroll down, there's a few links here, a map that tells you about the avian influenza control zones, a notice to industry that gives you some background information, and permits and movement permissions. So if you are looking to move birds particularly, but a number of other things as well, into and out of those zones, that gives you the conditions and whether or not that movement is allowable. And then at the bottom of that page are some further resources for backyard flock owners, rules to protect and detect disease. Lots of good information there. So I'm just going to show you quickly what one of the zone pages looks like and a bit of the functionality there. So if you follow the link to the avian influenza control zone map, you can at first see a zoomed out view of where we've established our primary control zones. So the purple is what's considered the primary control zone. It's the outside boundary around any confirmed avian influenza premises. The inner red circles or oblongs that are in here, that's what's considered the infected zone. And that is a much narrower window that's an area of higher risk that has different controls attached to it. So the functionality of this map is kind of nice. You can actually use this search bar at the top to enter your address. I'm just going to do Drayton. And that's going to bring me to Drayton right away. And then if I zoom out, I can see that Drayton is not considered in either the infected zone or the primary control zone. So if you're outside of that, at the moment, there are no movement controls. If you are inside the purple or the red, or if you plan to move something inside the purple or the red, what you need to do is zoom in a little bit closer to figure out where you want to be. And then go back to the main page and look at permits and movement permissions. And that's going to give you the information, whether it's live birds, eggs, poultry products. And it's going to tell you whether the movement that you're trying to do is permitted or not, given the level of risk. What we're trying to do with these primary control zones is make sure that we don't further spread the virus. At this point, we really are linking the positive premises back to wild bird introduction, but what we don't want to do is have us further spread the virus as a human vector by knowingly moving birds, eggs, or other products. So I would encourage everyone who is looking to move something to get familiar with this page. If you need a specific permit, that's something that's a little bit of a higher risk. What you need to do, and that link doesn't seem to be live, is, I will fix that, is actually get in touch with our permitting group. If you need a general permit, that's something that you can actually complete for yourself by downloading it off the website. And that is a traceable certificate that allows you to say what you're moving, where it's coming from, where it's going to, and what are the biosecurity controls that you've put in place to make sure that you're not further moving disease. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, so what I'm going to put in the chat here are also a couple of email addresses and phone lines. The first is our surveillance and diagnostics line, and what we're calling the sick bird line. So it's a number or an email address that you can report a high mortality event. If you and your vet have decided that, you know, the symptoms that you're seeing on your farm or your backyard flock are consistent with avian influenza, we would like you to report that to us so that we can get things moving as quickly as possible. The other thing that I will post in here is the movement control line and email address. That's where, if you are actually moving birds or things, not a hypothetical, but specifically moving something, and you need one of those specific permits, that's where you call. Otherwise, the general permit is downloadable from our website. So I will post that in the chat. And then what I would like to say is I do want to thank everyone who's been on the call today. The avian influenza situation is really evolving in Ontario very, very quickly. And I think these webinars are a wonderful way to get information out. Please keep your eye on our website and the information that gets shared from your producer associations or from OMAFRA or from Poultry Industry Council. We do want to do as best as we can to combat this disease and hopefully get it stamped out as soon as possible. So with that, I will conclude my portion of the presentation and turn it back over to Ashley.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jen. And we're going to have Jennifer on the line, of course, for some questions near the end. So if you do have them, feel free to use the Q&A function and we'll just keep track of those. So I'm going to invite Dr. Rosca to come on now.
Good evening, everyone. As Ashley and Jennifer mentioned, we will have a series of webinars for the next weeks, concentrating on status updates and provide extra information or answering your questions as much as we can. Last time I have presented information about the disease and the status of avian influenza around the world. Since then, the situation escalated in the United States and Canada with more outbreaks. Therefore, I will concentrate more on this continent. Having said that, this doesn't mean that the other countries are having a break as they continue to report consistent numbers of events. As an example, UK is reporting entering the second wave with 106 active events as of March 31st. First of all, I would like to remind you some clinical signs that you may observe on the sick birds. Keep in mind that some species may not exhibit any of these signs. As an example, the recent suspect of avian influenza in a small flock was presented as egg drop production with no mortality associated. So have incubation period between 2 and 14 days. There is quietness and extreme depression, decreased feed and water consumption, drop in egg production, high mortality and diarrhea, shell-less eggs were egg quality legs, swollen cums, wattles, and face, and hemorrhagic legs. The interactive map created by United States Geological Survey displays high path events daily. Between 1 week comparison is enough to realize that numbers are increasing as the wild birds are moving north. The red ones are representing the commercial poultry outbreaks. The yellow ones are the non-poultry, means backyard and small flocks, and the green ones are the wild birds. As you can see, the numbers are increasing exponentially in the past month, and it is related with the spring seasonal migration. The United States Department of Agriculture is reporting as of today 118 flocks tested and confirmed infected with HPAI in 24 states with close to 23 million birds. Moreover, on April 4th, a flock of more than 5 million chickens at a commercial layer operation in Iowa is among the latest round of the highly pathogenic avian influenza cases reported by the United States. This case was confirmed on March 31st and involved over 5 million chickens, making this the second largest number of birds to be affected by avian influenza in the United States in 2022. The first case of, interestingly, the first case of highly pathogenic influenza to be reported in a commercial operation in Texas in a pheasant operation. They were about 1,600 birds in that flock. And what that means, even though avian influenza virus is moving with the migratory birds, they are also resident birds that they are continuing to spread the virus in states where migratory birds moved already. We are on a peak of the migration season. However, we need to remain vigilant even after that. Keep in mind that Europe didn't have a break in summer and may be less cases, but still active. These are the two slices of the maps showing up the backyard flocks and commercial flocks events in the United States. Moving to Canada, as Jennifer stated about Ontario new cases. The number of events in east of the country remains stable with no more outbreaks since March 15th. However, Ontario has been under the radar with more than expected reported events. And these are the outbreaks that's been posted by CFIA on their website. And you can see it started March 27th and moved through April 4th. I will finish the presentation here, continuing to remind you that prevention is the key, and please try to avoid the poultry shows and the swap meets because they can spread the disease during the disease outbreaks, and attending events can increase the risk of spreading disease, and they're more often transmitted from one infected flock to another flock. And birds that they appear to be healthy can be infected and can transmit avian influenza to other birds before exhibiting any signs of disease themselves. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosca. That's a great overview. So now I'm going to invite Al Dam, our provincial poultry specialist, to come on.
Hello, everyone. Well, here we are again. So I'd like to show everyone a couple of things here. So I'm hoping you can see my screen. Are you seeing my OMAFRA screen there, Ashley?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so here's the scoop. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. There's a lot of things we're going to be asking you guys to do. Information on the OMAFRA website, it'll be found at ontario.ca/poultry. It pulls up this page where you'll have a lot of information. Some of the things I want to stress today, and it leads a little bit into our wild bird folks that are on the line too to help answer questions, is that we have a lot of concern with wild bird movement. You should consider all of Ontario infectious at this point with migratory birds that are moving around. Some of the things I'm getting asked about is how is it spread. Dead stock disposal is going to be a thing. Now I know on small flock you guys don't have lots of deads, but if you do start having deads, there's a couple of things we need to think about. One is going to be making sure that you're disposing them properly so you're not attracting scavengers, because some of those scavengers are coming up positive for avian influenza, including crows, turkey vultures, ravens, what else we got? hawks and eagles. So proper dead stock disposal is going to be very critical. There's a lot of information on our dead stock page. You can literally just Google dead stock OMAFRA. That'll come up. One of the things that's going to be important for you guys, and I'll put all these links in the chat too, is what do you do about migratory birds? So we have challenges with birds on your site. We have a fact sheet here that was written by us and Canadian Wildlife Services, so this link will be on there too. But it's real basic about reducing attractiveness in the first thing. Luci had mentioned that page. I just updated it now, and there's even more dots on the map than before. So this is an easy overview to see what's going on in the US. It is popping up all over the place. USDA has some information on their EFIS page, but when it comes to dealing with avian influenza, this is a fantastic infographic that Ontario Animal Health Network has on about what is avian influenza, how it spreads, how to recognize it. We'll put that in the chat. If from a wild bird perspective, Canadian Wildlife Services has got this one here, and this is a challenge on our wild bird side, because folks that are attracting birds, feeding ducks, doing anything like that can increase that risk of spread. We've already talked about the pages that Jennifer put up. There's some fantastic information on the CFIA page about protecting your flock from bird flu, along with a ton of fact sheets that you guys can access quite easily. Finally, and maybe this is at that point where I'll do the plug again for avian influenza testing of wild birds. If you guys are finding dead wild birds on your property, please send them in the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. We know that there's lots of it's in the waterfowl, but if it's jumping into other species that are acting funny, we would like to know that too. That gives us a bit more of an idea as to what the risk is to us. I'm going to read the riot act to you guys. Luci started it, but gatherings of poultry is not a good idea. I'm still hearing about stuff like auctions, buy sell trades. A lot of them are being canceled, and we really appreciate that, because this is a risk to the whole industry. We're not saying this to stamp out your industry. We're saying this so you can keep your birds alive. Another thing that is a real bee in my bonnet is that I'm still hearing about transport of birds happening. So broker transports or whatever, where people are doing runs from one part of the province to the other, or from one province to another. Once again, what are you guys doing? This is going to be a challenge that's going to impact the whole industry, not just the commercial side, but the backyard folks, the show poultry, everything. So anyways, that's my blurb there. I kind of want to end to see if there's any last words from our wild bird folks. Does anyone want to say a thing or two about that? Because I'm just afraid of, I can't reiterate how much or how easy it is to get influenza into your flock. Gatherings can be one of the easiest ways to do that, but you are going to walk, if you're going to get, there's a good chance you're going to walk this into your operation. And from that, Brian, you got anything to throw on the table?
Yeah, I can just mention kind of what we've been seeing it in. So we have 4 confirmed cases in wild birds in Ontario, and we have a number of different suspects, and we're seeing in a number of different species of waterfowl at the moment, as well as a number of raptor species. And Al mentioned the scavengers, and one species in particular that we've gotten a lot of calls from recently are about bald eagles. And it seems like they are potentially being affected by this quite a bit, and they are one of those scavenger species that is going to be scavenging on waterfowl, but also potentially on poultry as well if they're not disposed of appropriately. But those are kind of the major ones we've seen. The other big species that we've seen symptoms in are the Canada geese. And I don't know if that's because they're just one of those birds that's out there and more common than others, or if they're just more susceptible to it. And I think we're going to have more information over the next few weeks as we get more and more of these birds in. But I would just push what Al said. The more birds we can get in and test, the better we'll be able to figure out exactly who's carrying this virus and who's potentially going to be able to spread it to your farms.
And Al, if it's Chris Sharpe here, from the Canadian Wildlife Service. If I can just add messaging around avoid attracting migratory birds or any wild birds to your property. It's time to take down bird feeders, exclude wild birds from your pens. If you're frequenting areas with lots of wild birds, please decontaminate when you get home. Don't wear those same shoes into the barn. Your best solution is to eliminate interactions between your birds and wild birds. There are permit options to scare wild birds away from your facility, but if there's evidence of attractants like water where they can interact with your domestic birds, or they're feeding, access to feed, those permits are not going to be issued. So please be diligent. As Al mentioned, I think it's safe to assume that the virus is at least everywhere south of the snow line. And so for folks in Southern Ontario, please be very vigilant when it comes to your flock.
Thank you, Chris. I'll keep putting more of the links into the chat. And I guess at this point, that pretty much wraps it up for me. One of the biosecurity things actually I do want to stress, besides dead stock, and we've maybe touched on this before and we'll touch on it again, is making sure you don't walk it into your coop or your flock. So a change of boots would be probably the minimum you want to do. And don't forget things like your pets. So if you have pets that are running into your coop, the dog or a cat, that's going to be an issue. Rodents can be an issue. So make sure you're on top of that, and also spilled feed that will attract birds. And with that, I'll flip it back to Ashley.
For sure. Al, if you just want to hang on here, a couple of our questions actually relate to different animal species interacting. So one question came in around, what do I do about barn cats? Are they a concern with, bringing things in and out from my flock or anything like that?
They can be. So the commercial side, we really try and exclude barn cats from a commercial operation. So if they're catching a rodent or a bird and bring it into the barn, that's going to be a risk. Like I said, your dog running in the wetland and coming in is going to be an issue. But like I said, anything can walk it in, yourself included. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. And how might we go about decontaminating things like hunting dogs or whoever might be tracking things in and out?
Well, it's going to be a thing about cleaning off their paws, right? So, soap and water works great to get that off, or just not letting your dog in the pen. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do.
Okay. And then another question came in around rodents. So do you have any recommendations for keeping rodents out from smaller coops or any other sorts of coops?
So my concern, small coops. So I'm gonna do the old, I used to say thumb and pinky, but it's actually quarter and dime, right? So anything a hole the size in your coop, a hole the size of a dime, a mouse can fit through. A hole the size of a quarter, a rat can fit through. Mice tend to live in your coop and stay around, but rats live outside the coop and go back and forth. So rodent proofing your place is going to be important. If you guys have coops, like to dig. So if you have an outdoor coop that's covered, that's preferable. If you're afraid about rats getting into it, you may have to bury hardware cloth or mesh down up to a foot to make sure that rats or skunks or anything else doesn't try and dig through and come back up. Feeding is going to be your best bet. Keeping feed secure, because feed's an attractant. So old freezers are a fantastic way to store bagged feed because it's rodent proof and humidity proof and et cetera, et cetera. So we have lots of information on rodent control on the OMAFRA website.
Okay. Another question, this came in earlier today. Where can I register the amount and kind of poultry I have?
Register. So good question. there is no registry per se, unless you're a family food grower. So if you're getting ticks under the family food program to raise some birds, you fill out a form 300. If you're self-hatching birds for meat, you need to register under the family food program to get a form 300, or else you can't. So there's 3 reasons to register meat birds. One is you get information from CFO. 2, they know where you are in case you're in a zone, they can contact you. And 3, you cannot process your birds at a plant for custom slaughter. Anything else, there is no registry per se.
Okay. But just to reiterate, to get disease alerts and things like that, you can sign up for the Featherboard Command Center, so that at least will give you a bit of an alert what's going on in your backyard. Yep. So another question, something around having, I'm guessing they're layers that are aged, so they're about 5 to 9 years old. Should their deaths be considered odd during this time, or is that kind of business as usual for some of our older ladies?
Well, congratulations for having a hen that old, I guess, first of all. I wouldn't be too concerned if it's just one bird that dies here or there, but if a concerning number of birds pass away in a very short time, that would be concerned. Luci or Jennifer, do you want to talk about the issue about ducks and chickens and turkeys together?
Sure. There are some diseases that can be asymptomatically in some of the birds, and they can be transmitted to others. And that's the problem, that we need to keep them separate. Looks like turkeys are more involved and more affected as part of the avian influenza. About 65% of the turkey, the poultry flocks in the United States being turkeys. So have to be careful about that. So I would keep separate the waterfowl versus poultry. That will be very important, because waterfowl can carry the disease and may not show up symptoms.
I think, and if you have domestic ducks, keep them separate from your birds also, because they can pick up disease, may not necessarily show up. But anyways, it's, yeah, keeping your species separate is a good idea, not just for avian influenza, but for things like a blackhead, right, in turkeys. So anyways, lots of reasons to have biosecurity and separation of species.
Okay. I'll also just say, for those of you who are on the phone, *9 allows you to raise or lower your hand. So if you *9 through your phone, we can see that you have a question, and then we'll call on you. So just from the question and answer, for a small number of birds, what is the best ways to dispose them? Would it be burning them? I'm assuming they're deceased at this point as well.
Well, so incineration is a legal option in Ontario, but it's not an option to burn them. You need an afterburner. You need a very expensive incinerator to do that. If you are dealing with small amounts, it is a very biosecure way to do it. Burial or composting might be an issue. If it's an avian influenza concern, though, like if you lose a lot of birds, we probably want to get samples before you dispose of them. Before that, so at that point you'll be calling your vet, or the I think Jennifer posted the CFIA line, or the number 2. That 22, is it a 226 number? I think. Let's look again.
Okay, thank you. Question, for those of us buying and hatching eggs, do eggs act as a vector between farms?
Which one of the veterinarians want to take that one?
Luci, you can go ahead and I can fill in if you like.
Yes, so the virus can survive on the surface of the eggs because the reproductive system are affected. However, the reproductive system are affected only in poultry, but not in ducks, and that's why you'll see difference in eggs. So it's very less likely that it's going to be in the egg. However, if that's the case, the embryos are going to not eclose, so you're not going to have hatch too many chicks from those eggs.
So I'll maybe just add one thing to that, just to build on what Luci said. If you do have a hatch this spring that doesn't hatch, that's something to take note of and maybe chat with your vet about, because that can be one of the signs of AI.
So here's a question related to a wild bird that ends up being positive. What happens in the zones? Is there any zoning set up, or what are the ramifications of finding a wild bird as a positive AI?
The CFIA isn't setting up zones for primary control zones around the detection of wild birds. Public health does have a bit of a mandate there if there has been human contact, because avian influenza is a zoonotic disease that can spread to people. But the samples are still sent to the labs to confirm that it is indeed avian influenza, and usually some follow-up might be taking place in the area to see if there were any high-risk contacts, but we don't set up a zone around a positive wild bird.
Chris or Brian, do you want to add anything to that one? Or?
No, I don't have anything to add there.
Okay, so if someone's ordered laying hens from a particular zone where there's active cases going on, should those birds be put into isolation, or how can someone safely receive those birds?
So if there's something coming out of, through, or into a zone, they should refer to the information that's on the CFIA's website. If they're coming from a zone, they may potentially need to be permitted out, in which case there would be conditions applied to the permit, and the guidance would be given to you at that time. It really depends on the situation, and I don't want to get too much into specifics because it depends on whether you're in the restricted zone or the infected zone, and where the destination is, whether that's also in a zone or somewhere in the free area.
How long can the virus stay live on the ground or on items before it dies off?
I think I can answer that one. So in the water will be 30 days, in feces about 10 days. There is a little bit of concern about feathers because they can have an active phase of viral replication. So the infectious virus can persist for at least 120 days in feather tissue stored at 4 degrees Celsius, and up to 15 days in feather stored at 20 degrees Celsius. So it's depending on the temperature, and the colder season, the best for virus to survive.
So if someone sees a neighbor who seemingly might not be following some of the protocols that we're talking about tonight, and they're free ranging their flock still, is there any 1-800 line they could call, or how can someone handle helping that person maybe make some different decisions around free ranging flocks in areas where it might be a danger?
I think there's a couple of things we need to talk about. One is the fact that we're really wanting you to keep your birds inside, right? At least until the end of my spring migration, which is mid-June-ish. But this is not a disease we've never seen before. This is different than anything we've experienced. It's impacting wild birds. It's impacting domestic birds. Right at this point, we're hoping that you can shame them into doing the right thing. But we have, the more cases we have, the longer we keep holding the disease in the province, right? So if everyone has to do their part, moving birds is like free-ranging birds is a risk. Moving birds is a massive risk, right? We don't want to be moving birds around, whether it's to auction, swap meets, buy and sells, transport, whatever. Can't reiterate it enough. You guys need to lock this down, because commercial guys are in full lockdown right now. They're like, the whole province is concerned about this, not just Waterloo, Wellington, or Oxford County. So if you guys don't do it, one, you'll lose your birds because they're going to die anyways, and two, you're putting everyone in a 10K zone around you at risk too.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate earlier when we were chatting today, Al, about your comment saying there's no biosecure area in the province right now. We have to kind of consider the whole province a little bit of a risk, and really think about that in terms of what's going on in our own properties. So just to kind of flesh that out a little, someone's just interested, those with small coops who rely on the free ranging, is there a way to manage that during this, or what might you suggest for them?
There's no way to disinfect grass. You know, it's going to be tough, and I don't, like I said, we still don't know what we're dealing with here. We haven't had the full impact. We don't really know. Now, Luci can talk about what's happened in Europe, and maybe maybe Luci needs to talk about what happened in Europe and what's been happening for the last year and a half.
So in Europe, they started in 2021 in spring. As I said, the UK are thinking that they are going to the second wave right now. And the problem is that they were considering that the wild birds been passed already twice or 3 times through the virus, so they are less sensitive. However, they didn't have a break in the summer. They moved from the spring to the summer and the fall again, and then now they have steady cases. So they consider the environment being extremely contaminated, and they may consider to deal with that as being endemic as so far. So they have to heighten the biosecurity measures and then do as best they can to prevent entering the environment.
Okay.
So I don't think we're going to have a break in the summer. I hope I am wrong, and I hope I can take vacation as well. But that doesn't look like, especially with the amount of cases that we just saw it in 1 week in Ontario. It's widely going up.
Yeah. So there is a question just about the migration and how it's progressing. Do we have a sense of that, and is that going to be continuing similar to what it was in Europe?
I think, yeah, Chris can touch on that, but what we see in the United States right now, that we do have a positive case in Texas. What that means, the migratory birds, they moved already up north. However, we may have some resident birds that they are carrying the virus. So that's why we have to be vigilant with that. And I will leave Chris to answer the rest of the question.
Yeah, so migration is in full swing in southern Ontario. However, further north in Ontario in the boreal forest, there's still lots of snow. So Timmins still has 4 feet of snow. So many birds have not ventured that far north. But like Luci just mentioned, just because the birds have moved through doesn't necessarily, it means there might, birds with the virus won't be moving in, but they're already here. So it becomes a little bit irrelevant as far as the migration. The hope is, at least for waterfowl, that once they get onto the breeding grounds, they space themselves out nicely, and there's less risk of spread within the wild bird population. But then you have other species like colonial water birds, for example, that they might be fairly dispersed right now, but will become very concentrated as it moves into the breeding season. So I don't think we can count, like Luci mentioned, I don't think we can count on the migration passing through being the solution to this issue. Unfortunately, it does seem like it's going to be here for a little bit anyhow.
Okay. Yeah, that was another question, just when the hazard might become a bit more tolerable. So it's a bit ambiguous, but it sounds like similar to when COVID came to Canada. It came on one plane, and then it's been here having quite the time of us.
Warm weather, like summertime, may decrease the amount of the cases. We just hope.
So there's a couple questions, I guess, concern around hatcheries and, what would happen if a hatchery were to succumb to something? How would that affect supply, or where can people source chicks at that point?
So I can't speak to where people would source chicks. I'll maybe leave that for Al to answer, but if a hatchery becomes positive or becomes implicated in an avian influenza outbreak, we would treat it like any other infected premise. We do epidemiological tracing in and out. We would potentially place a primary control zone around it like we've done at other infected premises, and we would control movements of birds and things off of that site. So we would treat it very similar as much as it can be, given it's a hatchery versus a live bird operation, to our other infected premises.
I think with that, or like if it, is a hatchery positive, or is it the breeder flock eating that hatchery gone positive? So that might be some of the difference there, but either way, it's bad. As far as, well, once again, just coming down to sourcing birds, I hate to rain on anyone's parade, but like the amount of movement of birds in this province is massive. So it was not done well. It's going to be a challenge. Quarantining is an issue that no one really quarantines properly, and you can learn about that too, but we may be at the point where like any movement of birds is going to be a risk, especially when you're looking at every wild bird out there could be a risk to your flock, let alone you moving birds. So I think that's going to be a challenge. But the McMurray hatchery, that's a bit of a wake-up call to the industry, and I think we need to heed that, because if it can happen there, it's going to happen anywhere, and it could happen here.
So just a question around the potential of the virus to affect humans. That was mentioned, but what other species can be affected? Are there any other wildlife that we need to be concerned about?
We saw in Europe on foxes with neurological signs, and it may affect other mammals as well. So anything is possible, yes.
Brian?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Lucy said. They have seen it rarely in mammals. It's something that in previous AI outbreaks, there have been cases in red foxes. Domestic cats have been seen positive for this virus in previous outbreaks. So any mammal could potentially pick it up, but it's exceedingly rare. Realistically, we focus more on the birds because those are the ones that are going to be carrying the virus and going to be infected by it for the most part.
And is there any talk around vaccines of this for AI for chicks?
Okay, so about vaccines, we have all questions about that. First of all, the actual vaccines that are on the market, I'm not talking about Canada, I'm talking about Europe, let's say, they do not match with the actual strain. So it'll be very few and then less protection for the birds even if vaccinated. Canada is not vaccinating the chickens because it will be a trade implication. However, Europe being hit so hard, and the only way I give an example is because they will probably consider to start vaccinating the birds if it becomes endemic. They are working their trials. They've been working in France and I think in Netherlands, but there is no actual vaccine to get access to so far.
So this might be a question for Jennifer about how long is a zone considered to be infected, or maybe what's the life cycle of the zones that we're seeing?
Sure. So we haven't been through a 2022 life cycle in Ontario yet. So what it looks like once the zone is established is we set up some surveillance. So there's different activities that take place, including testing of dead birds, looking at maybe some baseline testing of other premises in the area. We also make sure that the infected premise itself goes through the full cycle of depopulation, disposal of the affected material, cleaning and disinfection, before we would consider releasing the entire zone. So it varies quite a bit. It depends on the size and the complexity of the infected premise. It depends on what else happens in the area. It depends on whether any of our surveillance samples in the area come back positive. So basically what we have to do is due diligence to make sure that the virus is truly out of the zone before we would consider releasing it again.
Okay, thank you. So someone's just wondering if there's any sorts of handouts that we might have that we could forward to retail customers who are purchasing different poultry products.
I'll take that one, and I think I'll do the old share screen again because I think one of the ones that work really well is this ON infographic. It's a PDF that can be printed off. It's sitting on the ON network. I think I popped it in the chat. There will be more materials being developed. We do have some things like posters and postcards. It's just a function of getting out during the the chick days and whatnot. You know, information can be pushed out, but I think part of the reason we're here tonight is hoping that you guys will spread the message too. It's only like we're a small group trying to get this out, but whatever you guys can push out, we would appreciate also. It's going to become it might be a hairy one. There's a story I'm hoping I could share that we were asked to talk about tonight. It's a story about how movement of birds can bring AI into it. And Mike Petrick, thank you for throwing that bone to me there on this. The story that Mike wanted to tell about, and I'm just going to reiterate it for him, is that there was a guy in Italy who had a chicken born on an island, and he was short on eggs for the grading station he had there on the island. So he took the ferry across to the mainland, drove 100 kilometers an hour to 100 kilometers to his brother's place, brought a flat of eggs back in his pickup truck, drove the 100 kilometers back, ferry, graded the eggs at the station, this grading station that was across his barn, and guess what? He broke with the eye. This happened in Italy, I think it was either this spring or this past fall. So long and short of it is, you can try to decontaminate, you can quarantine, you can be careful with your biosecurity. That may not be enough to stop the disease. So tightening yourself down is going to be it. Like not moving birds, selling birds, buying birds is going to be something that I know you guys want to do. That's what you guys do. This may not be the spring to do that until we get a better handle of what's going on. We don't know what we don't know, and I think that's the scary part about this. So
Right.
We're here to try and help.
So just a question to kind of build on that. Should backyard flocks be kept indoors till June? Till when? Can you make some comments on that?
Chris, can you kind of give us, a bit of an idea on where the migration is, but you know, if that's the risk we hope is the risk, then you're saying mid-June-ish?
That was the question. Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, I missed the question now. What was?
Well, the question is, do we keep birds into mid-June? Will that help? And I think Luci and you kind of already answered it. Like that'll help with the migratory side, but it might be longer. And I guess our best advice at this point is keep them in as long as you can. If we keep seeing more positive either in wild birds or in domestic, we may have to extend that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are doing surveillance on the wild bird side right now. It's primarily focused on sick and dead bird surveillance in partnership with CWHC. But we will be starting some of our operational banding programs where we will be sampling wild bird populations. So as early as the end of the month, I'll be sampling Canada geese in the Greater Toronto area. Folks will be sampling colonial water birds in May, temper breeding Canada geese in June, ducks through the summer. So that will give us an idea of prevalence in wild bird populations on top of the sick and dead bird surveillance that's already ongoing. So that will provide some insight into what's going on. It doesn't, no detection doesn't mean that it's not on the landscape. I don't want to provide a false sense of security there. But and it's easy for me to say because I'm not a poultry person, but until you stop hearing about new detections, I would try to minimize it or be as vigilant as you can possibly be. I think that's probably the best message.
Okay. Chris, have you seen much going on in the wild turkey population in Ontario as far as tracking or finding any disease?
Turkeys are provincial jurisdiction, but and maybe Brian can comment. I haven't heard of any wild turkeys, but I don't know if Brian might have more information.
No, I haven't heard of any wild turkeys that have been showing any signs or anything. And we haven't gotten any wild turkeys in. That's not a big surprise. Wild turkeys are one of those species that we don't get a lot of just because of their behavior. But we haven't heard of many or any wild turkeys that are showing clinical signs consistent with it as of now.
We have a question around, can the wind drift carry the virus? But maybe can someone just go through the different area or the different ways that the virus can be transmitted?
I can start with comparing. So the question is comparing with coccidiosis. Coccidiosis is more like a parasite and it's like in a spore format and will spread through the wind. It doesn't need a vector. However, the avian influenza virus needs a vector, needs something to get into to be spread because it's a protein. So it would, but not long distances.
And Luci, can you talk about the mortality rate in waterfowl and maybe just what we're seeing in the strain that's going around now?
In waterfowl, not so much high mortality. However, they can be different this year. So we haven't seen too many flocks being affected, but they may be showing up different signs because the virus is quite strong.
I think a comment has to be made too, though, like on the wild bird side, we are seeing it in waterfowl and we are seeing mortality, right? Chris, like you've had to deal with personally some Canada geese issues, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And this strain of the virus, I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but we're seeing wild bird mortality like we've never seen before from a avian influenza outbreak. And we've had a number of waterfowl, which are generally thought to be pretty resistant to negative outcomes from this virus, succumbing to it. So there is something a little bit different about what's going on now from a wild bird perspective.
Yeah. Well, and I think we have a question. Sorry to jump in here, Ashley, but there's a question in the chat about chickadees, doves, blue jays, like all sorts of other things. I don't know, between Brian and you, can you give us an idea as to what, like some of the besides waterfowl? And I think that's the question. You know, is feces falling into the coop an issue?
Yeah, so from the birds that I've heard about so far, so waterfowl is the big one, any sort of water bird, but the raptors are also pretty big. So making sure that they are not on the property as well. But we've also heard of it in a number of different corvid species. So crows and ravens in particular have been hit by this as well. And there have been a few positive blue jays out east. We don't typically see it in a lot of our songbird species, but again, we don't know enough about this virus to know for sure. Europe has detected it in sparrows as well as starlings, so it can occur in those songbirds as well. So we really need to be vigilant with really any wild bird at this point.
Al, there's just a question around avian influenza in humans. Do you have any info or insight on that?
Yeah, so
Public health.
yeah, it's a public health issue. There is some Q&As that have been pushed out by public health, so I'll see if I can put those in the chat, or they can be posted on maybe on the PIC website. Maybe that's a good place to put them too, and they'll be on. You know, like we'll be distributing those far and wide. There'll be more information coming from public health in the next, I think, week. Luci, I think they've said.
I would say so. As symptoms, you can look for flu-like symptoms and conjunctivitis, so redness of the eye. So, but it's depending on if you're immune compromised or if you're healthy or if you have other conditions that may expose you to the virus.
Okay. Chris or Brian, where can we learn more about where birds have tested positive and where they're located?
CFIA is working on a dashboard that will be publicly available that will include wild birds. I'm not sure the exact timeline on that. but that is in the works. That's probably going to be the best source for official results moving forward once that's up and running.
Right.
Yeah.
We may have more information for you on Thursday. Let's just say that as things develop and things are being produced.
Yeah, that's a good point, Al. We're going to be having another session on Thursday, same time, same bad channel. So hopefully if you have any other further thoughts or questions, you can bring them with you. Maybe we'll just go around the horn and have everyone talk about one key takeaway message they want to have.
Actually, there was a question in the Q&As about moving of from a naturalist or birder perspective. I'm not sure if that was removed, but I'll just touch upon that quickly. While it's not as concerning as movement from an area frequented by wild birds to a poultry facility, we should still be conscientious of moving from one area to another. Probably, removing organics from your footwear is probably the minimum thing. If you're in an area where you're getting, say there's lots of Canada geese and you have lots of feces on your footwear, or you get it on your clothing, decontaminating or washing that outerwear before going to another site it is advisable. That's what we will be doing as biologists. As we go into the field, we will be taking care not to spread it among wild bird populations. But that risk for most people is pretty slim, given they're just walking on a nature trail like that. In those instances, I wouldn't be too worried about it.
I feel I also need to talk about pet birds. So when I say pet birds, I mean like citizens, like parrots and budgies and stuff you keep inside. If you've got commercial poultry, you want to make sure you probably keep those very separate. If you just have pet birds, having them exposed to wild birds, like in an outside aviary or a flight run, may not be a great idea because they will die from this disease also.
Right. No mixing.
No mixing.
So I just see one last question here. So what about the practice of placing chicks in commercial operations during migration or during this risky window?
That's a good one. That is being discussed with other boards within the zone. So that's a call that's being made by the feather boards themselves. Generally, for the rest of the province, I guess it's a function of what do we do with them then, right? We have chicks in an incubator coming out. We have pullets going into laying barns. So the food production system is still ongoing and going. If we stop that, then I don't know how you're going to get your poultry and egg products, but that's going to be an issue. It's our system is made for just-in-time delivery, whether it's chicks, whether it's eggs, pullets, etc. I
can expand on that just a little bit if you like, Al.
Great, perfect.
So one of the links that I put in the chat, if you go to the chart that talks about permissible movements, you can see what is or isn't allowed when it comes to day-old chicks. So Al's right, the coordination function is taking place at the feather board level to make sure that the chicks have a place to go. But while there is an infected zone, so that really concentrated area where we know avian influenza exists, we aren't currently placing chicks into those infected zones, but we can place them in potentially the restricted zones around it if there's certain conditions that are met. So it's a big coordinated effort between the feather boards and CFIA and the owners at this point.
Good. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all of those really detailed, fruitful questions. So I was trying to go around the horn. I don't see any more questions. So maybe everyone wants to take a minute and say, what's your one key takeaway message until we leave it for Thursday? I'll let you go first, Dr. Rosca.
I would say to be vigilant. Look around you and then try to protect your birds as much as you can. Don't move the birds around.
Got it. And Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll second what Dr. Rosca said. Also, I would encourage everyone to sign up for the Featherboard Command Center alerts so that you know what is going on in your area. And also just to know that this is an ongoing situation that CFIA is trying to manage, and we are grateful for everyone's support so far, all of the premises owners that we've been dealing with have been lovely and committed, and we all have the same goals. And I just also want to say that if any of you who are listening are unfortunate enough to have an avian influenza outbreak on your property, know that we do have people to support you. So not only does the response come to deal with the disease, but we also have, you know, a case officer who is your shoulder to cry on, your confidant, your person to ask questions of when there's so much information coming at you that you can't handle it. So it is a fairly well-oiled machine that comes in and helps with the situation, but know that you're not alone. So please be vigilant, but also know that what comes isn't, you will get through it.
That's great. And actually, yeah, we've been posting about a lot of mental health resources in the agriculture community. There's a lot more tailored resources available, so we'll be sure to get those up as well. Chris, do you have any last comments here for tonight?
Yeah, I would just say that wild birds are all around your property, and that's okay. But try to limit attractants, minimize access or limit access as much as possible, and be vigilant. Don't allow them to interact with your poultry.
Okay. And Brian?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add beyond that, but I would just say, once again, if you do find any dead wild birds on your property or that you come across, then please reach out to us at the CWHC, and we will get those in and test those birds, and you will hear about the testing if you submit them to us.
Okay.
So you'll be able to know what's going on with those birds as well that you're submitting.
Awesome. Al, any last thoughts?
Yeah, fantastic group of folks we get to work with tonight, but if it's anything, spread the word, right? If we're trying to do our best here, we need you guys to help us spread the word. You know, don't put your birds at risk. And if you have any questions, look at the resources, contact us, and we can help you. But please spread the word. We need you guys to help us with this, because I don't want to be honest, I don't want to be here. I would rather be dealing with other issues, like spending time with my family, than giving updates about avian influenza running rampant through a province.
That's good. So we're all going to do our part. Thanks very much, everyone. And on behalf of Poultry Industry Council, thank you for spending some time and increasing your knowledge around the ongoing situation. We will have another session Thursday, April 7th. Stay tuned for more as the weeks progress. We're here to support you in your information needs.